Hello, today I'm going to be painting a mountain scene. It's got a couple of elements and it's nice and simple. That doesn't mean it's easy to paint, but when you have a nice simple composition, there's less to go wrong, but we'll see if we can manage to avoid that. I'm using Krita, a free app on Windows. You can go download it. And I'm using a Wacom tablet. Okay, so I start with the background, and you saw I put a bunch of different colors in there, and I use Gaussian blur to smooth her out. And now we need the big mountain shapes. Now be careful, like you just saw that I had too many peaks, so make sure you kind of join them together and they're not too raggedy, because that'll be a bit difficult to fill in later on. And one thing you want to make sure that you have one dominant peak, one middle one, and a few little ones. There's a well-known thing in painting is you have a large one, a middle one, and a small one. So it's kind of that concept. If you have too many, they'll compete. So once I have the big shapes in, so you can see other than the sky, I only have 3 big shapes really. Is the big back mountain, the trees, and like the snowy front. And you want to make sure that the trees in front are darker. That's very important, otherwise they won't look in front. Now it's a bit different with the snow in the front. Usually things get darker as they come forward, which is true, but because snow is white, is relative, so it will be darker than the snow in the background. But you get my point. It's a bit tricky when you're dealing with, massively contrasting colors. So yeah, so now we're trying to break up the shapes. The sun has come from the top right, and in this painting I'm going for a colorful sun, so that's why these rocks on the mountain are going a very orangey pinky color. So it's maybe sunset or sunrise. They're kind of similar. So, and rather than having the gray rocks, which they probably would be, it's the sun is very powerful and it's saturating the highlights. So all that means is, maybe it sounds a bit complicated, but all that means is you're allowed to use a saturated highlight, which has to be consistent from the top right. So if you imagine a big beam coming down from the right that can hit certain parts. Now it's kind of hard to work out which parts they should hit, but just keep in mind you want them to hit the important parts. So the biggest peak and the middle peak and maybe some of the bits of the smallest peak. Now it doesn't really even matter which ones they hit as long as it's kind of in the middle. And then we're well onto the snow. I'm a bit behind you, but the snow is in shadow. So obviously snow is whitish. It's reflective, but it's whitish. And when it goes into shadow, it goes blue. It's kind of a desaturated blue. So just take that as red for now. Not the color red, obviously. And just pick a nice desaturated blue for any time you do snow colors. And you can see in the final painting up in the right there that once you break it up, it starts to look like snow. And once you have the white and you have the contrast with the blue, it makes even more sense. At the moment, it doesn't make so much sense until you have the white. Now try to avoid using white for snow, because it's never really pure white unless very rare circumstances. So I should have pointed out I'm using the shape fill because I like to make shapes rather than paint with a brush. Sometimes I'll use the brush when it gets really fiddly, but most of the time I'm using the shape fill, which is making big shapes, and then using an eraser to take bits out. It's much easier than doing it the other way around. But use whatever works for you, to be honest. We're just trying to make nice shapes. That's the goal. And obviously light and shadow, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but I'm just saying if you get the shapes right, you've got a good chance of making it look good. So now I'm putting layers on top of layers, just so if I make a mistake, I can undo it easily. The layers are kind of optional. Now I'm putting the snow highlights in, and like I said earlier, the sun is setting or sunrise probably. Well, it could be either, I don't know. And it's making a pinky color. So if you look at the colors I'm using, it's orangey pinky, but obviously it's still towards the white side, but not quite white. Now that makes quite a big difference, so make sure not to go white. White's not really a nice color in general, so kind of avoid that if you can. So now we're putting in the highlights on the rocks. So you start off really dark, and then you go lighter and lighter as you go along. Once you get to the lightest pink. Now this is very, very pink, so it's obviously quite saturated, but that's fine. Yeah, as long as it's in a few places and don't go overboard. Like, you might be tempted to put it everywhere, which I am too. And you're like, well, that looks cool. And it's like, oh, yeah, you should go everywhere. Well, no, it's got to be concentrated on where we want to look, which is towards the big peak. It doesn't actually have to be on the big peak, but towards the big peak. And now I'm doing the same again with the snow. The more detail you want in the snow, you can use this eraser and take bits out of the snow usually where there's big rocks and stuff and vertical. So where it goes vertical, the snow can't land on. So if you imagine the snow falls and then lands and then settles, it can't settle on vertical like walls. So that's where we get the things that you can erase. And so most of this, next minute or two is fiddling around with the mountains, trying to add enough detail, being careful not to go a bit crazy and adding too much. There is definitely a point where you can go overboard, and I was probably close. This is not meant to be realistic. It's meant to, represent what I'm trying to paint. And if you start going too far, then you're probably starting to go realistic, and then you probably got to go much further, if that makes sense. You have to go realistic then, and then that's a completely different painting. But you'll notice now I decided to shadow up a few more areas. I'd probably put a bit too many highlights. So if you have too many highlights, don't be afraid to knock some back. So the focus in this painting is top left circle-ish. And so where all the red orangey color is basically. So if you spread that out too far, then the viewer doesn't really know where the focus is. It's like, well, it's everywhere. The focus can't be everywhere. It has to be a section of the painting, and it's good if it's like a third of the painting or something, or less. If it's more, then it's not really a focus. So. And this is a little bit big as well. You could even focus it a little tighter, to be honest. Now I'm looking back at it, but it's not bad. So now I'm messing around. So I think I'm mostly done with the mountain. So now I'm working my way forward. It's usually easier to work your way forward. I have to, but it usually helps. And I'm breaking up this tree line. So this is going to be a bunch of trees. Now, there's not much detail in this, and you're going to be careful not to overboard the detail. But you do want to put enough in there to suggest things are going on. So I'm putting in little lines, but the colors are almost exactly the same as the colors already there, other than the highlights of the sun is hitting some of these trees. But again, some, and only a handful in the front. I don't put them at the back because they wouldn't actually get there. But just be selective, that's all. So now we're on to the last plane, the front plane. And this is where you kind of add some human element, because we're going to put the little hut thing. I'm not really doing anything specific at the front here. You can see me like playing around. All I'm trying to do is just create a few variations of the blues and just kind of block off the bottom. So when you have the a darker color down the bottom, it'll just block it off. So it's so you can't like fall off the paint. And if it was all white, you could just fall off the painter, but it kind of stops you. So now I'm doing the hut, and you know, you gotta get it like sort of structurally correct, but it doesn't have to be amazing. And because it's got snow on the roof, it makes it a little bit easier. You just want to suggest this hut rather than try and paint it. Because generally everything else is simple. You can't really go and paint this hut perfectly because it doesn't really match anything else. So you have to keep consistent. So basic, and don't try and overdo it. And put the shadow in the background so you can tell. Like it puts it on the floor. I'm not sure if that shadow is a bit too big, but it probably is. But it probably doesn't matter too much, to be honest. I'm not sure the shadow would do that exactly. But we're not going for realism. We're going just for sort of abstract, just fun, trying to make it work. You could carry on. You know, you could make this painted realistic if you really wanted to, and add more layers and add more detail and add more texture, and be a bit more fussy with, you know, some of the elements where I left them unrealistic, you know, like the treetops and stuff are a bit spiky. They wouldn't be like that. And so you can take this further, and you could, so this took me like 30 minutes, I think, and this is 2 times speed. So you could spend another couple hours and make it really realistic if you wanted to. So that's up to you, but I kind of like just making them quick and having fun. So I'm coming to the end now. I'm just tidying bits up, and I wanted to put the pinky highlights on the snow, not so white, and there we go. So hope you liked it, and I hope I taught you something there, and I'll see you in the next one if you did. Thanks.